Welcome everyone, I should say, to Sunshine Coast for Safe Technology. Sunshine Coast being the wider region from, extending through Noosa and Sunshine Coast Council areas both. So this is a little bit of inspiration here, started by Chris. Chris Henderson is on the call with me as a co-host. My name's Craig Wyman. This is the first of a series of these expert interviews, as we'll call them, to just try and bring a lot more awareness and understanding to our community around the issue of electromagnetic radiation and 5G as part of that, and to help us all take action more effectively, more efficiently, I suppose. It's not as if we haven't taken any action on the coast here. But we'd love to hear from experts about what we can do and do better. And then we'll hear from other experts in time as well about the technology side, about testing, about home mitigation, about the health and biological effects of EMR. But today we're going to start off by hearing from a very special guest who I'm pleased to introduce. His name is Steve Toneguzzo. And Steve, you can correct me if I've pronounced that incorrectly.
That's all right. I get all sorts of versions.
Excellent. We'll kick off. Steve, I'll just give everyone a quick bio on you, if you don't mind, and then we'll dive into some questions. Is that okay?
Sure.
Excellent. So Steve is the founding chair of Environment and Communities Safe from Radiation, otherwise known as the ECSFR. Steve has significant corporate and government experience, as well as in matters of the EMR policy debate, such as standards development, the creation and enforcement of regulatory frameworks, and legal action against government. He's a fellow of the Institute of Engineers and holds numerous degrees in engineering, computing science, and technology management. So what's relevant for us today is that the ECSFR is a national leader in defending communities against the imposition of EMR. And they're currently really active behind the scenes of the Mullumbimby protests, as I understand, and have been active behind the scenes in the Byron Bay moratorium against 5G. So I'm sure Steve will tell us a little bit more about that as we go through. Bear with me 1 second. Okay. A little bit more background before we start on the ECSFR. So for anyone that hasn't come across their work and what they've done so far, here's a few examples. They've successfully stopped a tower in their community, which I believe was the one at Wilson's Creek, which is in the Byron Bay Council region, and been involved in helping others. They questioned the validity of the PANSA, that's the Australian Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety Authority, about workplace health and safety from radio frequency radiation, and with admissions from our PANSA that they have limited jurisdiction and workers are in fact not protected with the exemption of Commonwealth employees. They've put the New South Wales Department of Education on notice and are building a case. They've obtained admissions in Hansard, which are the government records, on the legal obligation of public servants to act in the public interest and on the genuine controversy over the science. That's a real interesting point that I'd love to go into a little bit more today. They've made a submission to the parliamentary inquiry into 5G with evidence of reliance on mercenary science. And lastly, they've recently submitted a cease and desist to Australia's Chief Medical Officer. So some of those things I'm sure we'll hear a little bit more about from Steve today. One more little bit of context before I shoot to the question, Steve. The context of this for us is hearing from you is to really give us a little bit more understanding at the level of how do we oppose external sources of EMR, like towers, small cells, Wi-Fi, both potentially as a community and also individually. And then when we speak to some of our other experts, we'll answer the questions which are more like, how do I mitigate sources of EMR in my own home and workplace? What can I do that's within my direct control? So, after that long-winded introduction, welcome Steve, thanks for joining us. And could we start by having you tell us a little bit about why and how you got involved in the EMR issue?
Certainly. So, look, as an engineer by background, electronics as well, I founded a global business that was involved in, I'll just say, describe it as onion layers of security. So you start off with data, systems, people, procedures, buildings, environment, geopolitical, et cetera, et cetera. And part of my business involved, understanding and use of wireless technology, which I thought was perfectly safe. I mean, here is, that's my very first mobile phone, right? We used to call it the brick. And the next version that came out, that's it there, right? So, and I've been using them and have been using them for many years. But look, I'll blow away a few myths, and I think it's important. So the first myth that I had was I believed that this technology was safe because it was approved allegedly by the government, and the government wouldn't allow unsafe products to be in the homes, would they? Well, I'll read you a statement from the ACCC that came out last year. And the press release is titled, "Half of all Australian homes affected by unsafe products." So to quote the ACCC, Australians would be surprised to hear that it is not illegal to supply unsafe products in Australia. All right, now that blows away a lot of misconceptions. Most people believe if I'm buying something, it's safe. Well, as a company, you can provide something that is unsafe and it's not illegal. All right, so that tells you a lot about perhaps corporate capture of government. Another thing that when I had my business, a chairman of a very large company made a statement to me. I was speaking with him about some compliance issues that they had. And he said, "Steve, why would I want to spend all this money to fix my product to make it compliant?" And I said, "Well, if you don't, you're going to get in trouble with the law and blah, blah, blah." To which he responded, "Why would I want to spend a lot of money on lawyers to get me out of trouble when I can spend far less money buying politicians to change the laws to my favor?" Right? And that right there is something that epitomizes the way our so-called democracy works. Okay? So understand, I think everyone needs an understanding that government is not acting in your best interests. Okay, that's, and that the products you're buying are being sold because they increase shareholder value and profit, not because they're protecting you and keeping you safe. Now, how did I get involved? Well, with that background, I had a lady that lives in my community came and knocked on my door and said, "Look, I heard you're an engineer. I heard you've got a bit to do with helping the community out. Help. Telstra is going to put a tower across the road from my house in the bottom of a rainforest valley. The antennas are going to be at the height of different homes in the valley, children's bedrooms. It makes no logical sense. This stuff is toxic. It kills you." And my first reaction, quite honestly, was, "You're a bit of a nutcase, go away." Because, like most people, tinfoil hat, cognitive dissonance, you can't believe it because it's like, come on. But anyway, because she was adamant and because she was part of my community, out of respect, I pursued it. And it only took me 2 days with the background in standards and regulations to realize that the whole issue is a big facade. Why was Telstra putting a tower at the bottom of a valley? It was because they were getting money from government to do so, not because it was commercially viable. Why did government want full coverage of the country? That's another story for another day. But yes, I discovered that this standard, we comply with the standard, as many people have probably heard. And the standard is arguably just a large deception. It isn't a standard, it's a guideline. And we talk to that later, but fundamentally that's how I got involved. And so I thought, well, okay, this stuff's toxic. My children, are going to school and will be going to school. There's Wi-Fi, there's mobile phones, there's absolutely, the environment and the home is saturated with what is a toxic pollutant classified as a potential carcinogen that there are thousands of research papers demonstrating harm. So that's a bit about my background, a bit of the truth of the way things are and how I got involved. And we formed the Community Association ECSFR with a number of people in the valley here. And we've just been, we've been, you know, working for free, ridiculous hours pretty well ever since. But, you know, and I think the win we had in Wilson's Creek helped a lot of people, gave them a bit of hope, opened their eyes up, and we've just kept going. And then along came 5G. So I'll leave that question at that.
Wow. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure where to go with that. There's so much there to unpack. I think probably most people, or certainly the majority of people that are joining us in this session, would have a little or a lot of a sense of what you pointed out in terms of the safety issues being very loose guidelines, heavily influenced by industry and so on and so forth, and the fact that government really isn't looking out for us. I wonder if you could give us a layperson's explanation of the ARPANSA admission of oversight. So I alluded to that in the introduction, and as far as I'm aware, that was around November 2019. Could you tell us a bit more about that and what it means?
All right, the document specifically is TR 182 for those that want to look at Orwellian doublespeak and try to interpret it. It's usual stuff, but essentially what it means is this. Okay, so we started from the basis that the object of the ARPANS Act is to protect the environment and people from the harmful effects of radiation. Now, okay, protection implies regulation. Okay, so if you're going to protect, you put in place regulation, you put in place a regulatory framework where there's standards, there's enforcement, there's penalty provisions, and so on and so forth. But the ARPANS Act doesn't have a lot of that. They have a perceived standard. It raises some questions. So now we look at the Australian Constitution, and you'll notice that constitutionally, the federal government only has jurisdiction over health in the areas of quarantine and funding of health. They are not a health regulator. They have no plenary, or whatever the term is, powers over health. That's a state's right. So the state governments and territory governments are the ones responsible for health. Now, but, you know, we have every telco, every government agency, every Department of Education saying, we talk to ARPANSA and ARPANSA advise us that it's safe. Well, they have no jurisdiction to advise that EMR, EMF in the environments and so on is safe. Okay, so now what do ARPANSA actually do? Well, they have this standard, which is actually a guideline, and if you read the forward of the standard, it actually makes it very clear it's a guideline. The standard doesn't use words like must and should, which you normally see in regulatory instruments that are standards. But in addition to that, the forward of the standard refers to that other laws apply, makes the point that the onus is on the industry, essentially, and other government agencies to manage risk. And it sets it up as a guideline. So, ACMA. Okay, so ACMA, the Australian Communications Media Authority, are constitutionally valid. They are responsible for communications, and that is a federal responsibility, whether that's a letter, wire, something through the wire, something through the air, telecommunications. So what ACMA do is they approve a device. So they'll approve, for example, the mobile phone as compliant with the ARPANSA guidelines. Okay, so ACMA can choose whatever they want to for compliance. You know, there's electrical safety, there's various things, and one of those requirements is ARPANSA. And when they approve a device, it complies. It's within that single device is within the guidelines. All right. So our device is approved, and you've gone and bought your mobile phone, and you know, it's approved by ACMA and it's within the guidelines. What is not covered, okay, this is where the deception starts, is if you're sitting in a classroom or your child is sitting in a classroom with one, you know, a Wi-Fi router and a laptop and a mobile phone, well, each one of those devices individually has been approved as complying within the guidelines. But add them together, All right. So, you know, what isn't approved is a cumulative effect of that radiation in the home, in the classroom, in the environment. Nobody manages that. Nobody oversees that. And in addition, nobody oversees that in the workplace. APANZA have the jurisdiction for Commonwealth employees. So when it comes to the military, when it comes to federal employees, there is protection in the workplace, and there is legal precedent. So Comcare is the insurance company that underwrites that, and McDonald versus Comcare. McDonald was a CSIRO employee, and he made a claim that Wi-Fi was causing him harm. Causation didn't have to be proven. So he didn't have to prove that the Wi-Fi biologically caused the harm. He just had to prove that he got worse when he was around Wi-Fi, you know, whatever. So, and that was awarded in his favour. It set a legal precedent, but in the Commonwealth jurisdiction. When it comes to states and territories and workplaces, and I'm talking about teachers in the classroom, doctors in the hospitals, there are no workplace health and safety provisions for non-ionising radiation, all right? So that in itself is that's one of the things that is admitted by this TR 182, all right? We've let Australia's workers down. The other thing that's admitted is that as I mentioned, I'll come back to the cumulative effect, but now we're talking exposure, right? So if you have a beer, you know that you can have one beer an hour. Alcohol's a poison, right? In small amounts, it may be therapeutic, and with a poison that's used regularly, you have a dosage, all right? So one beer an hour, you know, one sleeping tablet, one whatever. You know, in moderation, these things can be helpful, but in excess, they're harmful. No one monitors the exposure, the cumulative or the dosage around non-ionising radiation. So nobody says to you, look, you know, you can have this level, you know, X volts per metre squared or whatever, or you can have this level of dosage over this hour, and after that, it will become harmful, right? There's nothing around that. There is no research around children, particularly, at all. So the other admissions, so if I just summarise the admissions, what APANZA actually say is that these standards are not enforceable, right? That's really important. They're not enforceable unless there is another regulatory instrument or unless they're adopted in other regulations. Okay, so ACMA adopt them in their regulations. Does New South Wales Health or Queensland Health or, you know, various other items of legislation around the country adopt them in their regulations? No. So here we go. So summarising what that means is that unless you're a federal employee, you're not protected in the workplace. Now, when you consider that Lloyd's of London, I'll summarise this first. You're not protected in the workplace, number one. Number two, the APANZA guidelines standard have no effect unless other laws adopt them, and they don't. And number three is that, you know, when it comes to exposure, it's just not there. There's nothing that tells you that that, you know, you can be exposed to a mobile phone for 20 years of your life and you'll be safe, or 5 years or whatever. There's nothing there, right? So they're the three issues. And then when we consider that Lloyd's of London and Swiss Re, the insurance companies consider that they advise, so they're the underwriters for the insurance companies. And what they advise the insurance companies is it would be, quote, detrimental to the insurance industry if you were to offer any form of coverage. Now, what that means is that the risk is real. It's so high that we're not going to insure for it, right? You have a house that is next to a river that's guaranteed to get flooded. You know you can't get insurance for flooding. Same deal. If it's only a matter of time before this risk is realised, and that's why the insurers will not cover it. So what we've got here is we've got a major hole. In addition to this, the final thing around APANZA is they're not doctors. They cannot give medical advice, even though the perception has been that they have. One could argue that they've been doing so illegally because, for example, they've advised the AMA that radiation is safe for you, right? And here you've got a medical group that is accepting advice from someone who is not medically qualified to do so. So then where does negligence lie there, for example? So, what we have is we've now got a breakdown of that deception that says, oh, Panzer says it's safe, you're okay. You know, the world is waking up to that. So what happens next? In steps the chief medical officer. He's a doctor, right? So we've broken through the first barrier and now we've hit the next one. And Australia's chief medical officer says that, you know, EMR or 5G particularly is safe and not hazardous. So, you know, that's probably, I'll leave that as a summary of the answer to that question. So I guess I'll just, you know, just recap by saying one device, right? We understand that complies with the standard, but the classroom full of devices, the workplace full of devices, nobody's looking after that. Nobody's looking after it.
And which is not to say that even that one device has been shown to be safe, has it?
Well, correct. So the Panzer standard is based on the heating effects, thermal effects. So once your device exceeds the power in that standard, your head's going to get hot. And but there are thousands of peer-reviewed independent research that demonstrates that at much lower levels, there are biological effects. You know, like for example, at the radiation level of Wi-Fi in a classroom, kids develop concentration problems, they develop you know, all sorts of issues that are actually not conducive to learning. So, you know, the effects are there, they're proven. They're proven, these biological effects. And you're absolutely right.
Well, you've painted a dire picture, I must say. It's almost too much to digest how big this issue really is. Well, I've got a lot of questions come to mind. One of them is, I guess I set the context of this conversation was for us as a community here, a little Sunshine Coast community, little in comparison to the national agenda and what's going on at the levels you're talking about. So one of the questions is, what can we do? But before I get to that, now having heard all that and the enormity of this issue and the levels that it's coming from, is there anyone getting together to tackle that at the Panzer level, at the AMA level? Is there anything going on there? And there's always this question of, wow, you know, if we're going to contribute, say, 10 hours to this cause, should it be localised or should it be at the high level?
Right. I'll use the analogy. When ECSFR started, after we stopped our tower, we started helping a lot of other communities around the country in what we call putting out spot fires. And we realised that we were getting burnt out very quickly and going nowhere. What we had to do was go after the pyromaniac. And so we've since refocused. So for communities, and we'll come back to that, but for communities looking to know what they can do, and I'll talk about that a bit later, our website, I recommend people go to our website. There's a page on there called Take Action. What can be done? Well, we're actually coordinating, we have a crowd fund that's up and running. I have to be careful because I can't give away legal strategies, but I can say that we are spearheading what will be a multi-pronged national campaign against this. And there are a number of items we're addressing that do not require legal advice. There are a number of items that require substantial cost, you know, and so in order to do that, we have to raise funds. Once we get to a certain point, we can probably bring in a litigation funder to pick up the balance of it. But until we get to the starting line, what we need is the wider community in Australia, your community and all the other communities to help us get to the starting line. And I mean, the crowd fund is up there now, but we're going to start becoming more, we've just had it ticking away in the background, but now we're actually mounting national campaigns, and you'll be seeing more of that shortly. And I do ask that, you know, if people please help us help you at a national level.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. Well, I'll make sure that we include any relevant links to the website and to those particular pages.
Thank you.
I should also say that, and I'm sure a lot of people on this webinar now are aware of the community kit that the ECSFR put together, the Stop 5G action kit. I think I've seen a few different names for it, but that's been really useful, I know, for us and for other communities. We've used it to formulate some written correspondence with council in both council areas, Noosa and Sunshine Coast. And it's a really extensive piece of work. So that was
a team effort. Sorry to interject, Craig, but that wasn't just us. That was an example of us working with a number of other groups. And largely from our point of view, that was behind the scenes, but we can't take full credit for that at all. No.
So was that in conjunction with Northern Rivers?
Correct.
Right. Excellent. Okay, good. Well, for your part, on behalf of all of us, we say thank you and keep up the good work, and we'll do what we can to support you at that level as well. I mean, that's really exciting that there's actually some meaningful action happening at that level. Wow. Would it make sense to move into that next question, which is the cease and desist letter to the Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Brendan Murphy? Do you think that's the next thing to discuss?
Sure. Yeah, sure. We can talk about that. I left the last comment that we'd busted through the APANSA, ASABA deception, and now we've got the Chief Medical Officer front and centre. Look, again, that letter is available on our website. So anyone that wants to go through all the details, please have a look. It's freely available. It refers to a press release the Chief Medical Officer made where he says, there's just three main lines I'd like to read from it. First one, I'd like to reassure the community that 5G technology is safe. Okay, no qualification, it's safe. Number two, the radio waves to which the general public is exposed from telecommunications are not hazardous to human health. There's no risk, they're not hazardous. And there is no evidence telecommunications technologies, did I say about thousands of papers before? But anyway, there's no evidence telecommunications technologies such as 5G cause adverse health impacts. Now, the letter that we sent to him demonstrates that those statements are misleading. All right, there's no question. There's no question. And we're relying on the same sources he is, APANSA, the World Health Organization. Indeed, the Chief Medical Officer is a board member of the International Association for Cancer Research of the WHO that classified EMR-RF as a potential carcinogen. Now, to my mind, a potential carcinogen is hazardous. But, so look, what we've done here is there's no question that his statements are misleading. What there is question over is whether, you give the guy a benefit of the doubt, he's a busy man, whether he made those statements intentionally or not. In any event, what his statements have done is essentially put him front and center in the crosshairs for all liability, personal and otherwise, on behalf of the telecommunications industry. Because once APANSA stepped away from, it's safe, and we can give medical advice, once they stepped away from that, the telecommunications industry, where did they have to go? Because the base station deployment code states that the precautionary principle has to be applied. And they have to make commercial adjustments where there is risk. Okay, now all of a sudden there's no risk because the Chief Medical Officer says it's safe, it's not hazardous, and there's no health effects. So they've had absolution and off they go, and they can harm us and our children and whatever they need to do for profit. Yes, so that's the letter to the CMO. I mean, there's a lot. That is a really, I think, a good point of reference for people wanting to get their head around what are the issues here. It's a summary of it that points to, why it's not safe, why it's hazardous, and why there are biological effects. For example, the 5G is used, the millimeter waves in the 5G spectrum are used as a therapeutic good. Now, therapeutic goods have to undergo extensive testing. What does that mean? Well, it means it's proven beyond any doubt. Okay, so let me give you an example of what this the Wireless Mobile Forum, which is a global organisation of the multi-trillion-dollar telecommunications industry globally, sent us, or Telstra sent us, one of their documents, and as evidence that 5G was safe, because this document says that 5G millimetre waves are used therapeutically, and they've been used to cure 30 diseases. Wow. Well, hang on, APANSA tell us that there's no effects. Isn't it amazing that something that has no effects can cure or help treat 30 diseases? Unbelievable. So, so we looked into that, and we found that, that the effects, okay, here's an example. So by applying the millimetre wave to any area of your body for a 15-minute period, up to half an hour, at very low power, what it does is there are effects on the skin, as APANSA say. But what they don't tell you is that, those effects, what happens is the energy is absorbed by the nerves in your skin. It's transmitted through your nervous system, through your spinal column to your brain. Once it hits your brain releases endogenous opioids. Now, endogenous is what's being produced by the body. So it releases endogenous opioids, which give you a hit, right? And that's why it has an analgesic and pain healing or pain reduction effect. Not only that, but those chemicals and other chemicals get released from the brain into the bloodstream, and it permeates your whole body. So it doesn't matter where you actually put this device. So what we've got is, in a therapeutic sense, is effects on the brain, effects on the blood, effects on the immune system, effects on the inflammatory response, and in short doses, it's actually quite, and effects on cell reproduction, which if you add a bit of DNA mutation, you get cancer. But in a therapeutic sense, Russia and other countries, there's a number of countries, America, we found a paper on the National Institute of Health in America, in a therapeutic sense. But I come back to this, anything in moderation. Remember how I said about the one beer or the one sleeping tablet? Okay, so 5G millimetre waves in small doses actually are therapeutic, as it turns out. But if you're being bombarded for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, I mean, the concept of shall we say, an opioid-addicted, immune system burnt out population becomes really prevalent. That aside, what is clear is that 5G is addictive by design. All right. And we cover a lot of that in this letter to the Chief Medical Officer. And what we've said to the chap is, look, you're a decent bloke. You may not be aware of this. We're making you aware now. So we would like you to retract your statement. And if you don't, we will pursue further action. It was copied to the Governor-General, New South Wales, a number of different officials and media who are, of course, controlled and owned and blacked out on this issue. We've had a response from no one. No one. All right. So I think I said in the letter we'd be taking further action. Watch this space.
It's interesting. I wanted to come back to a few things there. I mean, this is mind-boggling. It really is. And thank you for being so articulate and clear. I mean, honestly, I don't think I've heard such a clear and concise explanation of what's really going on here in all of the digging around and research and listening that I've done in the last 12 months. I mean, this is super sharp. So I appreciate that. And on behalf of everyone, thank you. And thank you for having done the background to be able to speak to it so clearly. I can't imagine how much time you must spend on this. Yeah. One thing just to speak to very briefly is you were speaking about these health effects in the context of 5G. And I know we're just using that as a label. And sometimes that label sort of creeps into these conversations unwittingly, I guess, because really the issue is electromagnetic radiation. Right. And we're already exposed to lots of that in the existing 3G and 4G technology that we're walking around in. We're living in an EMR soup.
Yep.
So I always like to bring it back to that because it really is an issue of now as much as what's coming in the future, isn't it? It really is something that we're that we're up against right now, and,
Yeah.
and not experiencing the health effects. It's not like it's going to happen when 5G is sort of so-called turned on one day.
No.
It's already turned on, and it's variations of 4G that are happening now.
Well, Craig, if I may interject on that, the Australian Veterans, so military medical board has determined that RF causes leukemia, blood cancer, okay? And that's true for veterans. It's probably a long bow to draw, or maybe not, for the general population. However, last year, there was a press release, and I think we've got this in our letter to the Chief Medical Officer. There was a press release where the Australian government said blood cancers in this country have gone, coincidentally, if you look at the time, it's from when we first started using mobile phones and that until now, but they have escalated from a rare disorder to going to cost the Australian economy $500 billion over the next 15 years. That is what the federal government estimate the cost of the economy is, just from blood cancer. Now, childhood leukemia used to be a very rare disease. It is now incredibly prevalent. Babies are being born with brain cancer. Childhood brain cancer, glioblastomas, is massively on the rise. So you will hear, oh, there's been no increase in brain cancer. Well, actually, APANZA's research show that, the Australian government's research show that there has. But what there has been overall is there has been a decrease in traditional brain cancers. Glioblastomas, which are associated with EMF, have been escalating. And this is where we get into mercenary science. APANZA and ASABA or whatever, they did some research which showed that, look, there isn't any increase, but they left out in that paper a big percentage of the population. Okay, so this is true of what we see with a number of industry-funded / government-funded research, is that they conveniently leave out the important stuff to get to eliminate any evidence of harm, right? An ASABA study demonstrates that there is no health effect from RF. It's all in your head. They call it the nocebo effect. Okay, and it was peer-reviewed by a lot of, we shall say, well-respected scientists who are in bed with industry, allegedly. So it's a legitimate paper. But when you dig into it, guess what? There were only 3 people involved in that study. So on the basis of 3 people, which they handpicked, they extrapolate that and say the entire population, it's all in your head, right? That's not even statistically significant in the kindergarten. But this is the mercenary science that we're up against as well. I'm sorry, I got distracted a bit, but anyway, yeah, so back to your question, blood cancer is probably just the tip of the iceberg here, right? And so the point that we've also been trying to make to governments is that, if you don't care about the people's health, what about the national economy? What about the GDP? I mean, this is affecting, the hundreds of millions of profit that the telcos might be getting. How does that weigh up against the hundreds of billions of dollars that the government is going to have to pay out for healthcare and lost productivity?
Talk about bombshells. I mean, I can imagine if this information was delivered, today out to the mainstream through the mainstream media. We all know it isn't being delivered that way. But if it was, it's a bombshells. This is enormous.
Well,
it really is.
Craig, when you say mainstream media, a few years ago, ABC Catalyst did a program called Wi-Fried.
Right.
And that after that program, that Catalyst was abolished. Right, they shut it down.
Marianne Damasi's program, wasn't it?
Correct. So that's what happens if you're in mainstream media and you dare speak out about this. Now, let's not forget that Malcolm Turnbull, in his book recently, openly admitted that Rupert Murdoch controls the Liberal Party. All right, the Liberal Party and he controls the media, the Liberal Party of the government, and the ABC is the government. So, you can't rely on media to be independent anymore, unfortunately.
Well, okay. There was one other dimension to this PANS influence. I'll use my words carefully. PANS are okay. Let me just come back. Sorry, one more step back. The context I'm asking this from is when we make submissions, we write letters, we send emails to councillors or to other public officials. Often we hear either nothing, or we get the standard reply which references PANS or the World Health Organization, or ICNIRP, the International Commission on Non-Ionising Radiation Protection. I think I got that right.
Yeah, a German registered not-for-profit that are industry funded, yes.
Yes, okay. So what I wanted to ask was, could you say a little bit more about who ICNIRP is? Because our PANS who are supposedly acting on behalf of our safety, or at least creating the perception that they are, they defer their standards and their safety guidelines to ICNIRP. And the other thing I think within that context is to remember that our PANS levels, that the so-called safety levels or safety guidelines that we operate under in Australia are many, many times higher than other countries. So could you say a little bit more about that from your experience?
Well, the levels that we experience in Australia and America, for that matter, which are the ICNIRP maximum, are just economic. They're an arbitrary level set for economic convenience, because we're a very geographically dispersed country, and by having higher levels, you're allowed to pump out a lot more power, which means that you'd have less base stations per 100 kilometres square, 100, etc., etc. So that's the economics behind those power levels. ICNIRP was actually registered, I think, as a sporting charity originally, or something obscure like that, and it comes out of it comes out of Germany. It was started by Repiccioli, I believe, who originally was. I'll take it. Australians are up to their eyes in this. It was actually heavily stacked with Australians, believe it or not, ICNIRP, and somehow through industry funding and associations and what have you, they managed to become the world's authority. The Italian courts have recently ruled that when they ruled that mobile phones cause brain cancer, they also, as part of that judgment, made a decision that ICNIRP's advice was not to be wasn't reliable, that it was conflicted. But here's something that's really curious, right? So people in a PANSA, very senior people in a PANSA, and very senior people in the research body ASIBA are on the board of ICNIRP. Right? It's like this, when you join all the dots, it's just this very small group of people that are pulling the strings on all of these different organisations, but they're all the same, and creating this massive perception. It's the tobacco industry all over again. And what I think's happened, there's a United Nations document, and a UN NGO, non-government organisation, called PACE, and we refer to that in our letter to the CMO. And they very well, with many, many references, they call out that the telecommunications industry has basically learnt from the mistakes of the tobacco industry and perfected it. And so that's what, regulatory capture, industry research capture, that's what PACE allege in their documents. And they provide the references and the evidence. So, I mean, none of this is secret. It's all there. But that's ICNIRP, all right? They have, in our view, they completely have no credibility. They're not, if you want a credible standard, you have a Standards Australia stamp on it. You have an ISO, International Standards Organisation stamp on it, because those standards are actually inclusive. They involve all the, they involve community. They involve, if they need to involve doctors, and they look at it. Incidentally, when the PANSA standard was first established, Standards Australia were involved in that. And we have minutes. And when I say we, I have to say that there are many other people than just us that have this evidence. So, you can't just destroy it all if you come after us. But we have evidence that suggests that, no, sorry, it doesn't suggest, it states, the minutes of the meeting, that that Standards Australia withdrew because they didn't agree with PANSA's view on that only heating effects caused harm. Okay, and then so they basically kicked out the independent arbiter and ran with it themselves. This has been known about. Oh, those minutes also refer to workplace health and safety. So from 2002, the evidence trail demonstrates the government's known full well about the risks. Yeah, but that's ICNIRP.
Mm. So in summary, Australians, the health and safety of Australians when it comes to EMR is supposedly being looked over by this body called Panzer, who don't really have the authority or the jurisdiction to assert those claims. I'm using probably the wrong language, but I'm just trying to summarise what I've heard here. Not only does it stop there, but they reference some meaningless body overseas called ICNIRP for those standards. So it really is the dog's breakfast.
Yeah, and I mean, I believe the Australian Constitution. I don't believe that we're controlled by the United Nations, but referring to the WHO and ICNIRP would suggest that that may well be the case, because they're not an authority. No, they're an instrument of the UN. Okay,
well, given all of that context and background, which, wow, what to say? I have somewhat of a hypothetical question. If we were a new community that had just popped up,
yes,
and we've done nothing whatsoever in regards to wireless radiation in our sort of ambient environment and those that we work in, and when we're more closely situated to EMR sources like towers or small cells or Wi-Fi in schools or whatever, and we just stumble across some information that raises our awareness and piques our interest, and we start to go down the rabbit hole and see that there are health issues and we do build some concern. We're starting from day one, hypothetically. What would you suggest would be the best course of action for a local community to take?
Education. All right. Cognitive dissonance is a big issue. People have Wi-Fi in their homes, they have mobile phones, and they don't want to believe that they could, this device that they're addicted to and that they rely on for their jobs and everything, they don't want to believe that this could be harming them and their children. So it's, getting over that cognitive dissonance is a big issue, but and I think not taking an extreme approach, saying, well, you've got to, it's about safety, and it's about, a chainsaw is a good tool if you use it in the right way. Similarly, these mobile devices, perhaps there are ways that they can be used safer. There are basic things you can do. The key thing is to educate your community to minimize their exposure. So do not leave the Wi-Fi on at night if you're not using it. Turn your phones off. Don't have these things radiating you and your family 24/7. Just start to be a little bit more aware and a bit smarter about how you're using these devices. I mean, if you, as a community, if you want to make a difference at a local level, look, it's challenging because here's the thing: is that the Greens, the Labor, the Liberal, the National, their party policy is to support radiating the community. So you might have a councillor who tells you something, but they have to adopt the party policy, right? And this is where the problems start, is that, you're best targeting independents who have a voice in council. There might be someone who you have in council who's really concerned, but they may be a member of the coalition. Game over.
Steve,
really,
can I just interject? Up here, it's pretty non-partisan at a local level.
Okay.
They have to declare, and they have to declare where they got funding from their campaign. So up here is pretty non-partisan from the public perception or the information that's given us. So essentially, they should be all independent, and we can approach all of them, include individuals and all of them, because there's not just one councillor that is responsible for me. Each and every one is responsible for the entire area. So I guess bringing that back to, bringing that back to some of the things you guys have done in terms of council. We've briefed individual councillors in the past period of government. We just had recent elections. We now have 5 new independent councillors, including an ex-mayor, who all want to sort of get the Sunshine Coast back on track. How would you approach or give us advice in terms of approaching them and how our public can approach them? Because they seem fairly independent, other than, you know, maybe some of the ironed-on ones. But we've got a 5 new councillors out of the 10.
All right. Well, okay, reality and perception, and disappointment is the difference between expectation and reality. So one of the things, to put things in context, is that council can only act within their jurisdiction. All right. So now, what does that mean? Council have a mandate over environment, and they do have a mandate over public health when it comes to a public nuisance. So if you're burning tyres in your backyard and that smoke is going into your neighbour's place and it's causing them, you know, to cough and splutter, etc., council can step in and issue an abatement notice around that particular issue. So council do have jurisdiction. The other area that council have jurisdiction is that council are effectively a company that's been subcontracted by the state government. All right. There is high court. There's case law where council are not government employees. They've been determined not to be government employees. So that's a story for another day. But what council do is they defer to the federal government on matters of health. Now, I've established earlier, it is the state government that is responsible for health and radiation health. So, you know, they are negligent, arguably negligent, and you know, in breach of their duty of care, etc. And if they're just deferring to someone that has no authority. Okay, so what you can do is you can lobby your council, because at the end of the day, look, political reality, you know, the ratepayers are who vote them in. They want to get re-elected, and if they think the ratepayers and the businesses as well, business is a big one. In Mullumbimby, 100% of businesses were opposed to 5G. You know, if you've got those people on your side, it's strength in numbers. So you educate your population, you get the numbers in terms of the constituents, and you at all times remain rational and professional, and you educate your councillors. I mean, that's step 1 too, is to educate them and explain to them, look, you know, you've heard about tinfoil hats on the media, but here's the truth. And you know, and then there's the different areas that they can act in. Look, it varies, but you know, the environmental laws, if there's Indigenous artefacts, etc., or Indigenous significance, you know, things can be stopped. The visual amenity is another one in the planning side of council. You know, if you've got a 50-metre tower sticking out of the middle of the rainforest, you know, there's valid arguments around that. Also, environmental laws, humans are part of the environment, and that's where the precautionary principle comes in, is that if there's sufficient risk, council needs to activate precaution. Now, what councils will refer to is case law that is Hornsby versus Telstra. Okay, you can look that up separately. But His Honour made 2 decisions in that were fundamental. One is that the community, when they're objecting, didn't have evidence that was valid. Now, what is valid evidence? And Ray Broomhall, I think some of you have heard talk about this. Valid evidence is a doctor's certificate, because that trumps a panzer, it trumps anything. So the other thing that he referred to was a panzer, with the assumption that a panzer had jurisdiction over that council. Well, you know, I think TR 182 now says that the basis of that judgment was invalid. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, so get a lawyer to look at it, but I think, I don't think councils can rely on the Hornsby versus Telstra anymore to say there's nothing we can do, sorry.
And just to add to that, and Craig, I don't want to take over your spiel. So it seems like there's some, yeah, we've been approaching councils, and we'll put together letters and things that our public can get to these councillors. That's a fair thing to do as well. But it seems like there's a real sort of area in state government, because I don't think a lot of these state members have been approached with this information, especially not only the local ones. So there may be a pathway into state, because as you say, they are responsible for the cumulative effect of RF in the public. Yes,
correct. Although at a state level, we're talking party politics, and yeah, challenging, but you know, you target the chief medical officer, at least in your state, because that's who's ultimately responsible in your state. You know, and believe it or not, Queensland has radiation protection legislation. It just doesn't cover non-ionising. It covers ionising radiation, X-rays, etc. So there's already legislation in place. it just is it's just a big hole when it comes to RF. So yeah, target your chief medical officer, target your Department of Health. By all means, if you have some friendly counsellors, get them to help you with that. That they're just seeking clarity and information.
And with the information you've given us, we had a bit of an interaction this morning, chatting to a counsellor and saying, look, we'll go and get some information for you. And I sort of said, look, if he sends anything back from our Panzer, my ears are going to bleed. So at least now, I think the public and people listening here have got a good idea of how and we'll help them. Yeah, we procure some information and some letters, and we can all start banding together en masse, leveraging that, and then shoot that into those authorities and look for follow-up. I think that's a good strategy that most people can do without straining a leg or busting a gut. Something very easy for people to do. And I think we're nearing 1 o'clock. We've got some questions here. Craig, did you want to have a look at the Q&A?
Before we move on there, Chris, I just wanted to mention a little bit more for the benefit of our audience and to draw a little bit more detail out from you, Steve. I guess I opened that initial question, what's the best way for us to go forward as a community, as a hypothetical that let's start from the beginning and assume we've done nothing.
Yeah.
And that was really helpful. And right at the end there too, I learned something really helpful, which is the importance of state government and targeting the state-based health officer, not necessarily the federal, and not necessarily stopping at the local level of council.
Yes.
And the reason I say that's been helpful for me is because to date, I've had limited conversations with people that have engaged politicians at the council level and state and federal. And the picture to date, as it has looked to me, is that the state ones usually perceive themselves as the person in no man's land. It's a federal issue, which they all defer to. Oh, it's a federal issue, the Telecommunications Act or whatever it was, the determination of 2018, which means there's no local approvals required for these installations, these small cells or whatever. But what you're saying is, in fact, they're not in no man's land. They're a prime target for our education.
Well, I'll qualify that. What telcos can legally do under federal law is they can build towers. They can't, the minute they turn them on, then they're actually causing a health problem and an environmental problem. So, they can build all these towers, until they're blue in the face, but it's turning them on. And then what happens is that they are then against your will, against your free will. It's like if I'm smoking a cigarette, which is a known pollutant, and I blow it in your face, I've assaulted you. Especially if I do it with malintent and I do it with the prior knowledge that it's going to harm you. So none of these telcos can deny that they're on notice. Okay. This is an area, this is something that, again, Ray Broomhall's talked a little bit about, the area of assault, or a lot about actually. It's a tricky area of law. It sort of gets, there may be other ways that I won't go into that are more palatable. But the other thing too that you need to understand, or everyone needs to understand, is that you can't, in the same way that you can't believe anymore that the government is there to look after you, neither is the judiciary. All right, most of them are political appointments. They have careers, and they're not going to make decisions that's going to damage their careers or upset their political masters. So, how you approach legal action is very important. You don't just go to court thinking you've got the best case and you're going to win. So, yeah, and why I'm saying that is that, one of the things we did in Wilson's Creek was we put respectfully all of our councillors on notice that we may well charge them with assault if they personal liability, if they were to approve the tower in Wilson's Creek. We didn't have to do that, fortunately, but it is an option, but it's an option that I think you'd have to be the judge would have to have nowhere else to go if you were going to go down that road, because can you imagine the precedent? Whichever judge sets a national precedent that mobile phone towers assault people against their will, that person probably wouldn't get very far out of the courtroom. You think about the damages claims and so on and so forth. So yeah, it'd be a very brave judge that that does that. But look, it's going to happen sooner or later.
Yeah, we had an experience of the judicial system right here on the Sunshine Coast earlier this year through the David Evans case, David versus NBN Co. So who knows what's going on there, but that certainly didn't play out the way some of us may have expected that it might have, and the way David might have wanted it to back in January, February. So it certainly raised some questions. And to be fair, I think just to pull this back to the context of what's gone on so far, I know Chris has been central in engaging Sunshine Coast Council and councillors and even staff. And then some others, myself included, up the northern end of the Sunshine Coast here, have been engaging Noosa Council through written submissions, and we haven't really started one-to-one conversations with them yet, but that's the next stage. Yep. So this has been really helpful, I must say, in putting some context around that and what to talk about, and also painting the picture of what we're up against. Because I imagine, this is kind of leading into the next question, if I was a councillor, and I started to unravel what's really going on here, it puts me in a hell of a position. Am I wrong? I mean, that's a difficult, issue to navigate. You've got local people that are waking up to the health effects and the fact that the safety guidelines are basically rubbish. Yeah. And then you've got a federal government and state government communications coming down that say differently. So where does it leave me if I'm a councillor?
Yes, very tricky. Well, your books would want to be balanced to start with, because state governments can abolish councils at any time, right? Or merge councils, or et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, really, when you're looking at a strategy and how you approach things, there's so many layers that you need to consider, and as the Latin goes, I think pensula fin, which is always consider the end. So where do you want to go? And risk assessments. I mean, it's a very good question that you asked, Craig, is that if you're a single councillor, let's not also forget that councils get money from the state and federal government to roll these things out. Okay, so there's yeah, it's a bit of a challenge, but if you've got a strong council that's financially strong and they've got the backing of the people and the support of the people, then it's a bit of, all of this is about a bit of psyops as well, because that's what they're doing to us. 5G is banned by it's probably one of the most censored topics in our time, 5G, by the mainstream media, etc. And and you're coming out with all these experts that people look up to and trust, saying that it's perfectly safe, and and it's all about getting in your head and us and them and all that sort of stuff. Well, you can flip it around. So and one of the things that whether you're a local, state or federal level, let's look, at the end of the day, it's still us that have the power, right? We're still, you can do a vote of no confidence by voting someone out at a political level. So that, mums and dads have that political power. So there's a political solution. There's, as consumers, right? I mean, these companies wouldn't do what they did if we didn't buy the stuff. So, there's that as an issue as well. And, shareholders also. I mean, at the end of the day, the shareholders have the ultimate power in these corporations. Do they really want to be harming children for, for dividends, etc.? I mean, is that what we're really about? Is there not a smarter way to do it? So there are different strategies that aren't not necessarily legal. I recall in my earlier years, people were complaining about the prices of fuel. So there was a strategy that said, look, if everyone boycotts buying fuel from just one fuel company, pick that company and everyone boycotts it, right? You would destroy that company. And that would give a very clear message to the rest of the oil companies about fuel prices. But do you think people can coordinate? And, you know, this is the problem, is that you know, we have to help ourselves because no one else is going to do it for us. And, you know, what you're doing with your group, what other people are doing with their groups around the country are, at least, you know, it's a brilliant start, and it's all about coordinating people. It's about using people power to get the desired outcome. And yeah, you can start at a local level. I mean, you have the power over your council, and don't ever forget that.
Steve, I'll just add to that. I've been involved in other campaigns in other lifetimes, and the most success came when we leveraged a change. So state government changed, you get straight into the new minister, he rewrites the plan, sacks the old crew on the project, and then you get a different solution.
Yeah.
I've had that happening to myself. I've seen that with my own eyes. So that's why I'm so excited by the fact that we need our local constituents to get in the grills of these new politicians, these new local politicians who have this new feeling of responsibility, and you know, they're very new. You know, you probably might get a different response out of someone's been there for 2 terms, but hey, we've got a real opportunity that we need to leverage with half a new council to really get the information fundamentally that you've expressed to us. And my will for starting the group and getting involved was that those people on a fundamental level would understand exactly what you understand.
Mm-hmm.
And if I've done that job, then they can make their decision, but they have to live with that decision that they make.
Yes.
It's as simple as that. So if we can get all those representatives, the information that you've given us in terms of what's really going on, then I'm happy with that. I've done my job.
And if I may, just another document I'll refer you to, ECSFR's submission to the Parliamentary Inquiry on 5G, I think it was number 229, the last couple of pages. So our submission to the Parliamentary Inquiry was about a risk assessment, identifying all the risks. The last couple of pages are targeted at local government. And so they identify, for example, the real cost of going to the cloud, the real cost of the Internet of Things. And so, you know, if you can't appeal to their human nature, Chris, as you just, you know, alluded to, then maybe you can appeal to their economic nature. And I think at least take both approaches, open their eyes up to the public safety issue, but also open their eyes up to the economic consequences.
Yeah, for sure.
Wow, this has been really useful on so many levels. And I just had an insight just then, Chris, for you and I. I'm going to suggest that we actually follow this up with another session, which you and I, Chris, might host, and we can go into some of okay, what do we do next as a local community, given the context that Steve's painted for us. And some of this information is new to me. And I know we've got lots of really keen people showing up now in the group and that are listening to this live, and will hear the recording. So I think we're in a great position to take a whole new level of action that really could really make a dent. So we've kind of done the groundwork over the last year or so to get this rolling, and now here we are. We're about to sort of take a big leap up in our effectiveness. I suspect it feels that way anyway. So we'll follow up with that. I've just got some other points here, Steve. I wanted to raise with you something from the Q&A. So one of the questions is, councils and councillors can hide behind local government and environment court. So councils can knock back an application for a tower, say, but then it goes and gets approved through the environment court. Could you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, I think that's where the likes of Hornsby versus Telstra come in, and when you look at precedents in law where the council's been lost the case, because what the judge or the magistrate will always tell you in the transcript is where you went wrong. And in the case of Hornsby versus Telstra, as I mentioned, the evidence was one thing, the valid evidence being the doctor's certificate, and the other one was the reference to a panzer, which I personally believe, as a layperson, that is now invalid. You know, that we've had arguably a panzer misleading the courts. So I think that's where you start. Look at the precedents, look at where councils have lost, look at why they've lost, and make sure you have a strategy for the next court case to ensure that you've plugged those holes.
Mm. And in the context of legal action, say, if there's people in our area that want to pursue action, I know there are many that already are. If anyone hears this and decides, well, I live within, you know, X number of meters of a tower and I've never really liked it and I want to take action now, I can see that there's a pathway there, or I've got a little bit of inspiration. Do you, as you see it, are there really good legal experts available to us? I know everyone references Ray Broomhall for good reason. He's been a leader and a pioneer in this field. Has his knowledge sort of rolled out more widely, and are lawyers and solicitors available to help us?
Ray's approach is one approach. There may be quite a few others. I think whatever you do legally, just understand that if you are going to mount a serious action, you know, you are talking in the millions, possibly the tens of millions. And yeah, so whatever's done, you want it to be very, very strategic so that it sets a precedent that would be used nationally. And to that extent, I think, look, I come back to our comment about spot fires. You know, we decided that rather than tower by, some people attack tower by tower by tower. And what we've found is they may be successful stopping a tower in one neighbourhood, and it's just shifted into the neighbourhood where the mums and dads can't afford to fight it, right? So you're getting an inequality based on, you know, the affluence of a neighbourhood as to whether their children are getting radiated or not. That to me is not a good solution. What to me is a good solution is something that has a national impact, that is very strategic and is national. So I just caution people that if they are going to look at stopping a tower, try doing it, you know, try getting, the best way you could do with council is to get council on side, okay, and get council to issue an abatement notice, a cease and desist, to stop irradiating the, you know, their constituents. And that's something that I doubt only a very brave council would put the funds up to do that. Yeah. And at the end of the day, I mean, what you'll find is that where we have an advantage is 5G isn't pervasive yet. Although while we've all been locked in our homes, for example, the Melbourne CBD is completely, you know, it's got everything. It's got the cameras, the smart lights, the 5G. The eastern suburbs of Sydney are pretty well saturated in it now. You know, they're popping up these 5G towers everywhere without people even realising. But that's where we can stop it, because people aren't using 5G yet. The challenge we have is that people are using 3G, 4G. So you're going to have fractures in your neighbourhood as well. I mean, yeah, there are challenges. There are challenges, and you know, and at the end of the day, is really the issue, is it about stopping altogether, or is it about reducing the level of saturation, educating the public, informed consent, so people are using it wiser, safer? You know, this is where the research needs to go. We're not, I don't, you know, certainly there is no reason to have Wi-Fi in classrooms, right? They should be cabled. Children are most vulnerable. And if we could have our way, we'd pull Wi-Fi out of all the schools in the country tomorrow. Would we pull all the towers down? Probably not. Would we stop 5G? Absolutely. But a moratorium. You know, what I'm saying is that no more. You know, we've got enough. The place is saturated. Let's just take a breath. Let's be honest with ourselves and look at what this is doing to our health, our children, our economy, you know, as a result of the health. And let's look at how we can manage the risk. And if the risk can't be managed, well, then we pull them down. I mean, that's, you know, that is what it is. But yeah, it's a long-winded way of saying that I think you'd have to go really in with your eyes open and a lot of money behind you if you were going to take on, you know, try to stop something that's already operating.
Yeah, look, I appreciate that perspective. That's super helpful in a number of ways. I love the fact that you just reminded us that this is not necessarily about stopping, and I'm using air quotes to say they're stopping 5G. I think the industry and the rollout actually relies on us sustaining that duality, that made up dichotomy of yes or no, or 5G or no 5G. It's more subtle than that. It needs to be a nuanced inquiry and understanding of what this EMR technology really is. And you're right, it's not inherently bad. It's inherently bad in the way it's being rolled out and what it's looking like. But the engineers, the few engineers that I've spoken to have all said there are ways to do this safely or more safely.
But it costs money. It costs money.
And yeah, exactly. It costs money. So it's not necessarily in the industry's interest to do that. The other thing I've taken from this is that we really are, navigating a minefield. There's so many variables and it's a complex thing and no one's got the answer. We're all sort of, we're all in this moment with this issue and none of us have been here before. So we've got to stay calm and stay together and communicate clearly and navigate through it using our own wisdom and common sense. That's all we've got to rely on.
Yeah, but like the way, one of the things you speak about engineers, and I'm an engineer myself, and one of the things that I found quite devastating actually was when I became an engineer, we had a code of conduct that said you had to act honestly and ethically. This year, the Institution of Engineers Code of Conduct was changed to say you have to make a reasonable effort to act honestly. So, seriously, go on the website and have a look. All of our fabric, all of our institutions of trust are being eroded and undermined. So, yeah, we have to take matters into our own hands, unfortunately. You can't rely on someone else to do it.
Yeah. In the context of everything that's gone on in the last 2 or 3 months, and anyone would be forgiven for looking at this and just being overwhelmed and thinking it's kind of it's a hopeless situation. But no. Whatever it is, it's not. I can see that you've given us some really clear avenues to look at, and there are ways to do it. And like, if nothing else, we have to stand up and assert our sovereign rights.
Yes.
And look back in 10 years, 20 years time and say, no, whatever we did what we could and we took action rather than, we didn't sit back and just take it. We actually did what we could with the best we had available. So if we do that, we're winning.
Well, Craig, I think as Russell Crowe in Gladiator said, what we do in this lifetime echoes in eternity, and we are a long time dead. And I think I personally, I exactly your sentiments. I like to look into my children's eyes and know that I wasn't a contributor to poisoning their bodies and their minds and their futures.
Yeah, I've got goosebumps because that's exactly the reason I'm doing this. You look at them and see their innocence and they're inheriting whatever's being created here. So if we push back as best we can, that actually gives a great segue into, I think, some of the other sessions we'll follow this with, which I alluded to at the start, and that is getting some experts on to speak about what we can do at home and in our workplaces to mitigate our exposure. And you've alluded to some of those things in this session, which has been amazing as well. So thank you for that. I'm pretty sure I've covered all the Q&A. I'm just going to quickly scan the last ones that have come in there and also hand over to you, Chris. Did you have anything else you wanted to add or ask or comment on before we call it a day?
No, just to say thanks, Steve. You've been fantastic. Just been able to chat to you over the phone many times to gain your perspective and your knowledge. I think you've given us enough to digest and formulate some strategies. And I hope in those on the call, especially, I know those on the call are those types of people who are concerned, want to be involved. So I'll put a quick shout out to those people and say, hey, if you want to join us, we're just a small core group. Maybe there's 4 or 5 of us. We really need help. If we want this group to push forward into the future, and I'm talking about the next 12 months, 2 years, we need help. We need people with skills and drive and passion and dedication. And because we need to keep that ball rolling, just like you guys did at the start when you guys formed, Steve. So just a shout out, contact us through all the avenues you've got. If you were invited here by emailing the subscriber list, yeah, get back to us.
Yeah, I'll ditto that, Chris. Thank you. When you mention skills, I mean, if anyone's got skills and interest in contributing to things like emails, automated email campaigns, social media, even strategizing, or if you're someone that likes to talk and you've got a good handle on this issue and you're happy to meet with counsellors and business owners and those sorts of people and sit down and talk, those are just a little handful of some of the skills that we need to really make a dent. So by all means, contact us by email or message us in the Facebook group. Well, I think that's a bit of a wrap. We've gone a little bit over time, but excellent content. Steve, I'm blown away. This has just blown my mind. I thought I had every time I look at it, I'm blown away, but you've given us such a concise little bullet point series of bombshells. That's one way to say it. So thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to you too, Chris, as well, for all the time and energy you put in the background and in conversations you've had with Steve and in lining this up for us. So really appreciate it on behalf of everyone that's listened and that will hear it in the future as well. I mean, might even get some of our counsellors to re-listen to this too. I think that'd be a great avenue as well. Yeah,
I mean, that's what we tried. Well, in the initial phase of the council, we had 2 or 3 really interested. And let's hope we have 4, 5, and 6 interested, and they can start taking on some responsibilities and looking at the areas that Steve mentioned. My sort of understanding is a lot of these guys don't even understand their roles and responsibilities as councillors at the get-go. So all this that we bring them is all the education to them. So let's get together and do that. It's important.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And Steve, did you have any other sort of closing comments or anything else you'd like to finish up with?
Final thing would just simply be, keep an eye on the ECSFR website. We'll let you both know, Chris and Wayne, Craig, when we're when we're mounting different campaigns. And please help us to help you when we do launch these. Thank you.
Excellent. We'll make sure we include a link to your website. Is that the best way for people to contact you if anyone's interested in contacting you directly? I don't subscribe to that, please. I just don't have the hours in the day. So we do monitor the info@ECSFR email address, but what you'll find as you grow is that being a small group that's very dedicated, there's only so much you can do. So it's all about being strategic and focused. Yeah. So sorry, I very rarely respond. I totally get it. We're a bit cooked as well, and because there's only 4 or 5 of us so far, so that's why we're putting the call out for help. All right, so the best way to learn more and go further into anything you've said is to just go straight to the ECSFR website. So we'll include the link to that. And I don't know about anyone else, but I'm certainly looking forward to seeing what comes out of the the cease and desist letter and you guys holding our Panzer to account as well. I'll be watching that with bated breath. All right, well, thank you very much, and look forward to speaking again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Thank you, mate.
More good results to share. Thanks, Steve. Be well. Thanks, Chris.